I'm Amanda Smith, a reporter at Decential based in the New York City area. I cover Web3 and crypto culture, reporting on the side of the space that the mainstream often misses. Of all the Web3 events, ETH Denver has to be the most fun and fascinating to be at as a reporter. I hope you enjoy this voice diary from my recent trip to ETH Denver, ushering in the beginning of the bull run. I bring you along to the venue, sharing what I saw, heard, and observed. I highlight key takeaways from ETH Denver organizer John Paller, SEC Commissioner Hester Peirce, Head of Policy at Coinbase Kara Calvert, and of course, the US presidential candidate Robert Kennedy Jr. If you didn't make it to this year's ETH Denver and still feel FOMO, stick around. Last year's ETH Denver was cold. The lines were crazy. We waited over 2 hours just to get in. And it was pretty soon after the FTX collapse, only a couple of months, 3 months. So that there was a different sentiment in the air. And although it didn't feel like a bear market, and, a lot of people say that the best building happens in the bear, and it shouldn't change, the vibe at all, you can definitely feel an elevated energy this year. Bitcoin's above 60,000, ETH is above 3, and there's a collective agreement that crypto is back and that the bull market is here. And also that it happened pretty fast. I was having a chat yesterday to a contact and friend, and she was saying it felt like last year we all learned how to ride a bike, and this year we're riding that bike. So it's happening fast. And yeah, there's just a sense of optimism and expression in the air. The waft of the weed in the venue. There's just this whimsical energy this year. There's fairy floss stands, people walking around with their big fairy floss. There's a Mad Hatter and an Alice in Wonderland near sort of inspired or near sponsored setup. There seems to be more drinking and more beer stands versus coffee stands. There's an inflatable octopus walking around, led by the Mad Hatter and people in costumes. You have that at every venue, but there just seems to be this carefreeness this year. A sense of a collective sigh and being able to let our hair down a bit after a crazy, tough year or two. When I spoke with John Paller for the Curtain Raise story, we were talking about how general crypto conferences, it's just become cool not to go to the main venue and to sort of occupy yourself around the perimeter of the conference. But ETH Denver is different for many reasons. The art, the experience, the permission to play, the action, it's where people want to be. Last year when I was here, an Uber driver said, ETH Denver's like an entire nation looking after itself, and it's so true, and it's even felt more this year with the start of the bull market. I find some of the best conversations at ETH Denver, or I've had at ETH Denver, are with Uber drivers. They all tend to have their own interesting story about the space, or just their own interest that just makes for very fascinating conversations. And I was on my way to brunch with to see a friend in the space, and I was talking to the driver about his experience, and he said he bought Dogecoin back in 2018 when it was a fraction of what it ended up becoming at that period, and it ended up selling it for 56 cents, one of its highest points, and made 50K. And he was just saying how he was basically homeless, and he had such a turbulent childhood, and crypto was like this refuge for him, and has become this opportunity to change his social his social status and his upbringing. But it's just a fun brunch outside, outside of the venue. I had a guy sitting next to me who had a hat that said market cap hat. So good, brilliant. And then another guy sitting next to me who was very, very eccentric. He's a polyamorous guy from Portland. He has beautiful painted nails, and he was saying how he used to buy 1 Bitcoin per month with his barista tips back in 2015, and how he doesn't need to work anymore and he keeps getting scammed on LinkedIn. But work is just a way to prevent him from getting bored, which I think his lifestyle and his choice of relationship is maybe connected to. But it was just another example of going from this really deep philosophical conversation with this previously homeless Uber driver to this very eccentric, very well off from what I can understand, very unassuming guy with a huge beard, painted nails. The contrast was very stark and very, a reminder of all the characters we have in this space. SEC Commissioner Hester Peirce took to the stage in a much-needed conversation about regulatory clarity. Although a little off-brand for ETH Denver, it was suddenly an important conversation about the desperate need for clear rules of the road for the industry. She made the point that she was a little sad to be on stage because what she represented is the fact that the industry, that the developers and founders and the brains sort of driving this revolution are spending time and brain power thinking about how they can build in a way that avoids areas of regulatory ambiguity, and just how clear rules of the road are absolutely essential in pushing this forward. She admitted that it's been frustrating within the SEC and that, not in her words, but it's difficult to push things forward working alongside the top crypto cop on the planet, Chairman Gary Gensler. But she seemed very positive, and she said she was optimistic about the space after seeing us all. Commissioner Peirce said admitted just how slowly things move in the SEC. She started in 2018, and that summer they had their first Bitcoin exchange-traded product come before them as a commission. And she thought back then, which was quite a long time ago, 6 years, that it should have been a yes. Now, the conversation went in the direction of, in the absence of a court ruling in favour of Grayscale to create an exchange-traded fund based on Bitcoin, would it have made it over the finish line? The argument is, having that clarity would have saved investors a lot of headaches in terms of having a safe vehicle to invest in the space and an established pathway instead of going through some of these on and off ramps, which can be problematic. We heard from Kara Calvert, the head of policy at Coinbase, and she really stressed the desperate need for clarity at the federal level. She spoke about stablecoins being, the killer app right now, and how regulators don't really understand them. And so we need to create a foundation for the growth of stablecoins. She spoke about how we need something for commodities, obviously, at the federal level. And third, how we need to make sure that we can offer digital asset securities, because they're a great opportunity to, raise capital and do some really cool things. So the legislation they're pushing for really cuts across these three sort of pillars. The biggest crowd I saw across 3 days was for the Robert Kennedy Jr. fireside. It was interesting to see such a big crowd and such an interesting group of folks come to see him, and just anything political at ETH Denver felt quite new. But as John Palla was saying when he introduced Caitlin Long and Robert, Mr. Kennedy on stage, he said that crypto folks we actually are political. We just don't like the flavour of the brands we're getting, which is obviously the two parties. And that was an interesting preface for the talk. There must have been thousands of people. It was a full house. At least half of the event, attendees were there, I would say. And yeah, it was an interesting mood. We had this guy in his early 20s come to the stage, close to the stage, obviously it was barricaded, and he was yelling, "Shut down Bitcoin, Web3, shut down Bitcoin." And he was wearing a shirt that said, "Just stop oil." And we thought he was talking about, like, screaming about gas prices, and we thought he meant on-chain, but he meant oil. And what was interesting about that, he looked like he was drunk or something. And what was most interesting was he was the same guy that I had a very brief conversation with at Kennedy's press conference, an hour before. And he asked Kennedy whether Bitcoin was related or this technology at all caused autism. It was a very off-center question and a very strange guy. But again, Caitlin reeled it in and said, "This is a peaceful crowd." And while there are murmurs from the crowd prodding Kennedy a little bit, it wasn't anything like those two sort of outbursts. Today I discovered a whole new section of ETH Denver. It's been said that the setup this year is much like the original and some of the early ETH Denvers. And yeah, it suddenly felt a little different this year in that regard. And so this section was separate to the main venue and not something you would stumble upon unless you're there for a talk, which is what I was doing. And so I walked across there and discovered this very, like I said, whimsical, experimental, very eclectic place. They had an open floor for workers and builders and devs. It was very dark. They had these inflatable octopuses, this, DJ booth, this art interaction, a gaming section where people were playing games and launching games, and then booths. It was a very cool section, and like I said, something you might not stumble upon. And I was there in the morning for the SheFi talk, and that was wonderful, and a community that I will certainly check out. They really focus more on the education, sort of in comparison to Boys Club, which is what I checked out and what I heard later. And so they were talking about the importance of events for women and really spontaneity and that serendipitous energy you feel when you're meeting in real life. Like, we're all very much online, especially in Web3, but they were talking about the power, especially for women, to meet in real life and attend these events and make other friends with women in the space. That was really important. And then I did head over to the Boys Club talk, which was a little later in the day. And obviously they're legends in the space, very vibey. And they introduced a couple of interesting concepts, and what they were talking about specifically was the flattening of the algorithm, and how we're all living on machine learning sort of informed lives and devices, and just the challenge for content creators, but also just this new sense of optimism about new media coming out, podcasts, newsletters, niche publications, or as Americans say, niche publications, and how decentralization is the end to some of these problems, and how having more than one platform and one algorithm value can flow to the edge and end of the network rather than it be centralized. So I left that talk and also the SheFi talk feeling really optimistic and really, a strong sense of calling to make some female besties in the space. When I spoke to John Palla for the curtain raise story pre-ETH Denver, he said that we can expect a little bit more of a serious tone this year. Not that it will negate the playfulness and fun that is ETH Denver, but that we have some important conversations to have around regulatory capture and clarity and what this presidential race means for crypto. And while I certainly did feel that tone and that sense of we've got work to do still, the optimism and the bull market vibes and just this sense of shaking off the shackles of the last year or year and a half totally trumped any amount of seriousness. I think we can all agree, and we did all agree, that clarity is super important, but it was interesting to see that I think that the impact of the optimism maybe is even more important, and the way that we're going to be able to create that mainstream cut through. Not to say that all of those other elements aren't important, they are, and they're absolutely necessary, but it was just interesting to feel that excitement. And while I didn't feel a lack of that last year, this year was just on another level, and it felt very future focused rather than sort of looking in the rearview mirror about the problems in our space and what went wrong, which was like last year with SBF. This year was more about what's ahead of us